Okay, you asked for it, so I'll give you the answer. Remember, this video contains mature content, so be mindful of who is around you while you listen to this. Is masturbation a sin? 98% of men and 89% of women struggle with masturbation. So this is not just a man's struggle. It's not just a single person's struggle either. Many people think that, well, I'll just do this until I get married, and then once I get married, I'll stop. But research shows that 70% of married men and 40% of married women admit to masturbating on a regular basis. And so people wonder if this is okay. Is masturbation a sin? Now, obviously, masturbating while watching pornography or while entertaining lustful thoughts and imaginations and fantasies about another person is sin. Jesus was clear in the Sermon on the Mount that lustful thoughts are sinful thoughts. Matthew 5:27-28. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So obviously, masturbation involving pornography or lustful thoughts or fantasies is sinful. But is the act of masturbation itself sinful? Some people say that masturbation isn't wrong because it offers an innocent way to fulfill sexual desire. So if you can separate masturbation from lustful fantasy, is it still sinful? Now, there is no explicit command in Scripture concerning masturbation. It's not even mentioned in Scriptures. Some people try to say that masturbation was the sin of Onan. In Genesis 38, it says, "But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, and so the Lord put him to death also." Some people try to take this verse to say that, masturbation is wrong because Onan spilled his seed on the ground. But the sin of Onan has nothing to do with masturbation. Onan's sin is that he wanted sexual intimacy without responsibility. He did not want the name of his brother who passed away to continue, and he wanted to build his own legacy. And he knew that if his brother's wife got pregnant, his brother's legacy would continue, not his own. So he spilled his semen on the ground. It had nothing to do with masturbation. And so the Scriptures do not specifically address this topic, but there are a lot of topics the Bible doesn't specifically address. The Bible doesn't talk about abortion or cocaine or social media use. But just because something isn't mentioned in Scripture doesn't mean that there aren't biblical principles we can apply to this subject. God designed sex to be experienced in the context of marriage between a husband and wife. Sex was created to give and receive pleasure within the context of marriage. The problem with masturbation is that it removes sexual expression from its intended purpose. Sex was designed by God to create intimacy between husband and wife, and masturbation takes it out of that context. 1 Corinthians 7 says this, "So I say to those who aren't married and to widows, it's better to stay unmarried, just as I am. But if they can't control themselves, they should go ahead and marry. It's better to marry than to burn with lust." Notice it doesn't say that if they can't exercise self-control to masturbate. No, it says if you can't exercise self-control when it comes to your sexual desires, then you need to get married. All right, masturbation is not given as a solution to curb sexual desire because masturbation conditions a person to experience sexual pleasure apart from their partner. Masturbation is not the best way to relieve sexual tension as you prepare for marriage because it trains you to move away from intimacy in order to get your sexual needs met. When experienced that way, it can often become addictive, which is why many married people still struggle with masturbation. They thought that once they got married, it would solve this problem, but it didn't because they trained themselves to receive pleasure apart from another person. And if you've been conditioning or training yourself to receive pleasure that way, you can't just flip the switch and stop when you get married. And so masturbation becomes an addictive quick fix to get your needs met, and it reduces the urgency to develop intimacy with your spouse. right? Developing intimacy in marriage takes work, which is why many people choose to take the faster, easier route of masturbation, which moves them away from intimacy with another person. So instead of spending your single years training yourself to receive pleasure apart from an actual person, use that season to learn how to manage your sex drive. Because if you think satisfying yourself on demand prepares you for marriage, you are out of your mind, right? You still have to manage your sex drive when you get married. So it's better to learn that skill now than before you get married. See, God designed sex to be mutually fulfilling, but masturbation is the opposite of that. Masturbation is the act of self-gratification. C.S. Lewis said this: "For me, the real evil of masturbation would be that it takes an appetite which, in lawful use, leads the individual out of himself to complete his own personality in that of another, and turns it back, sends the man back into the prison of himself, there to keep a harem of imaginary brides. And this harem, once admitted, works against his ever getting out and really uniting with a real woman. For the harem is always accessible, always subservient, calls for no sacrifice or adjustments, and can be endowed with erotic and psychological attractions which no woman can rival. Among those shadowy brides, he is always adored, always the perfect lover. No demand is made on his unselfishness, no mortification ever imposed on his vanity. And in the end, they become merely the medium through which he increasingly adores himself." Man, that is so good. See, masturbation is not the purpose for which God designed sexuality. His design for sexuality is all about connection. I mean, even on the physical level, the hormones released during sex are designed to bond you with your partner. And so masturbation is bonding to yourself, which is why it's not fulfilling or satisfying. In fact, you feel emptier and lonelier because sex was designed to connect you to your spouse. And when you remove sex from the context that God created it to function in, you fall short of God's best. You know, some people say, "Oh, well, what if I'm gone on a business trip and, I only think about my wife? Is it a sin then?" Well, here's the thing. Sex is not a need, right? You need food, water, and shelter to survive, but you don't need an orgasm to survive. And I think if you are apart from your spouse for a while, it's an opportunity to exercise self-control. 1 Thessalonians 4, 3-5 says this: "It is God's will that you should be sanctified," which means holy, set apart, "that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn how to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God." See, God's will is that you be sanctified, which means set apart for Him. And then he breaks down what this means, that you avoid sexual immorality, that you exercise self-control over your bodily appetites, right? That you act in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like those who do not know God. Now, obviously, this verse doesn't specifically address masturbation, but I think it applies. I think abstaining from masturbation is about controlling your desires instead of letting your desires control you. I think you should control your desire for sex and pleasure instead of letting that desire control you. You should master your passions instead of letting your passions master you, because that is how people who don't know God live. They are ruled by their sexuality, their desires, and their urges. They don't know God, so their biology rules their life. But you know God, which means that you are to submit your biology to your theology. So I believe that when it comes to masturbation, you should not indulge in this desire, but rather exercise self-control. 1 Corinthians 6:12 says, "I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything." Right? There are a lot of things the Bible doesn't say this is wrong. And so the real question you have to ask yourself is it beneficial? Is this helping me get closer to God? Is this helping me walk in holiness? Is this causing me to grow in patience and self-control? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't do it, right? He goes on to say, I will not be mastered by anything, right? I will not be enslaved, controlled, or brought under the power of anything. And so you need to ask yourself, is this becoming addictive? All right, I've learned that anything that doesn't satisfy, anything that is not fulfilling is always addictive. And because masturbation takes sexual pleasure outside of the context for which it is created, it ends up being unfulfilling, which means that when you engage in that behavior, it doesn't fill you up, it leaves you empty, which causes you to go back to it again and again and again, creating that addictive behavior. It promises to relieve sexual tension, but it actually increases your desire for it, which is why it is addictive. And if anything masters you, if you come under the power and control of anything, it's not good, and you need to break free from it. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says this, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. See, everything we do is supposed to be for God's glory. And so if you can't do it for the glory of God, then you shouldn't do it. If you can't glorify God while you're doing it, then you don't need to do it. And so while the scripture doesn't speak directly on this issue, the scripture is clear that masturbation is not the context for which God created us to experience sexual pleasure. It doesn't help you prepare for marriage. It trains you to move away from intimacy to get your needs met. And it only provides temporary comfort while at the same time leaving you feeling unsatisfied and unfulfilled because it bonds you to yourself instead of another person, and it can become extremely addicting. And because there isn't anything beneficial by engaging in this type of behavior, I encourage people to not engage and indulge this behavior, but rather to exercise self-control. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor, smash that like button for me. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, hit that subscribe button and bump that bell so that you can be notified when new videos come out. And if you'd like me to do maybe a video on how to overcome masturbation or pornography, let me know in the comment section below. I have a lot of parents who watch these videos and I love to share them with their teenagers and their kids. So if that's something that you'd be interested for yourself, or maybe something that you'd like to be able to share with your kids on how to overcome masturbation and pornography, let me know in the comment section below and I'd be glad to put out that video for you. Thanks again for watching, and remember, if it's not good, God's not done. We'll see you next time.